and somewhere around there in the 1700s, the steam engine came along so they could pump the water out of the mines, and which ran on coal, that they were digging out of the ground.
Right, and so we really scaled things up with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, 1700s. Now there's a paper that just came out in Science within the last few days indicating that we really should go back to the 1400s instead of to the 1700s if we want to get a decent baseline for where we're at, because the heating is obvious from the 1400s through 1750. So we use 1750 as the baseline for comparison of today's global average temperature. But this paper suggests that we really should be going back a little further, back to when the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was less than 280 parts per million, and the global average temperature rise as a result of human activities had already begun in the 1400s. And it wasn't because we were burning coal at scale, it was because we were churning up the soil and we were keeping livestock, and livestock are, sources of methane. Right. We were all gathered around in our cities, and starting to have adverse impacts on the environment.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, what makes it so interesting is that we are very much out of sorts when it comes to our history. I mean, we look around us and go, oh, look, everything's fine.
Yes.
It's a nice day. Look at the sky's blue, and let's have a ball game, whatever. But if you go back 100 years, 200 years, whatever, where you look at the loss of species, the passenger pigeon, for example, or the great auk,
Carolina parakeet, the dodo,
right,
on and on the list goes.
Right, and these things within our generation we haven't experienced. What we've experienced in our generation is what? What's gone extinct? I don't know.
Things that we don't know about. Probably the ivory-billed woodpecker. But to actually declare a species extinct is such a grueling, long-term project that even to say this species went extinct requires an enormous amount of data and a long time without spotting that particular beast. So, a while back I mentioned the two paradoxes I start my presentations with. One being that industrial activity produces greenhouse gases, while at the same time it produces sulfates. So we have a source of warming by holding the heat down.
With the carbon in the atmosphere.
Right. And we also have a source of cooling with the blanket. So whether we keep it going or whether we turn it off, it's going to heat up either way. So that's the dilemma at this point. And the other paradox is, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's vaunted fifth assessment, which came out in 2014, only massive geoengineering of the Earth's atmosphere will prevent global warming.
Now that's the Intergovernmental
Panel on Climate Change.
That's a mouthful.
That is.
I mean, most people wouldn't understand what that is.
Right. It's an international body that is charged by the United Nations to get together in working groups and then creating this very detailed, large synthesis of what's going on.
Universities around the world?
Universities and government offices around the world. And these working groups are comprised of 20 plus people, and they have to reach consensus within the topic area. Everybody has to agree. And then the report before it is...
Very conservative.
Oh yes, because, if 19 of the 20 people in the room agree to something and the 20th person says, nah, I don't think it's that bad.
Because X, Y, Z or something.
Then boom, we're back to the most conservative approach that everybody can agree on. And then, before that report is released to the public, it is vetted through the political process. So governments of the world get to take a shot at it and say, I don't want the IPCC telling people this or this or this.
We can't mine the coal anymore. Or
right. So that just gets taken out. So as a result, it's a very conservative body. They say global warming is irreversible in the absence of massive geoengineering of the atmosphere's chemistry.
And essentially that means there's not a darn thing you can do about it.
Exactly.
I mean, because nobody has any magical machine that's going to engineer this and take the carbon out.
Bingo. And so Truth Out called that fantasy technology, and in 2014, and then in 2015, the United Nations National Academy of Sciences and a European body of similar stature both concluded the same thing. That's fantasy technology, that there's no way to geoengineer.
Opium or something.
Right. So there's a paradox. We have triggered an irreversible process in the absence of fantasy technology. So again, we need to do A, but A is impossible.
Well, you know, I mean, in this 2017 year we live in, they talk about we're going to renewable energy sources, and we're going to, you know, start using wind turbines and solar panels and battery operated cars, and it's all going to be fine as long as we do this before
2100.
2100, yeah.
But all that maintains the heat engine. That's what Tim Garrett's work shows. Is Tim Garrett's work is essentially ignored by climate scientists because and certainly by organizations like 350.org, because they're promoting the idea of switching to a quote new economy, where we keep churning the world planet, we keep churning the living planet into dust by other means as fossil fuels start to decline.
Machine grinding
Exactly.
away.
Right.
And we're just going to do this with electric go-karts or something,
And all of that maintains the heat engine. Again, if we somehow came up with enough raw materials to make enough solar panels and wind turbines to power the planet forever, if we do that by the day after tomorrow, the absence of global dimming means that we fry the planet within a matter of days or weeks.
Now the global dimming, who knows about this stuff? I mean, do the people in power know about this stuff?
Absolutely. It's interesting because there's a BBC documentary. It's actually just a 1-hour program put out by the BBC on global dimming. Yeah. So you can go to your favorite YouTube channel, for example, and type in the search box BBC global dimming. I'm pretty sure it'll be among the first things that shows up.
I've seen it.
Yeah. It's not long. It's a little less than an hour program.
I think it came out in, it was in the early 2000s.
05. I'm pretty sure it was 2005.
Okay, that sounds about right. Yeah. I did see that program.
And to my knowledge, the first Referee Journal article on the topic came out in December 2011 with James Hansen as one of the co-authors. Hansen et al. He was the senior author. It doesn't contaminate the water supply until 30 years, so never mind.
Well, right. I mean, when you bring up a good point there with this recycling business that, here we are in Bolingbrook, Illinois, and, we put out our trash and our recyclables, separate the paper, the plastic, all that business. And, I've looked into it a little bit, and what they say is that most of it ends up in a landfill.
Right.
Because it's contaminated.
Of course.
And they can't do a darn thing with it to recycle it, unless it's maybe aluminum, clean newspaper, and cardboard, and
right.
That's about it. And then the plastic is they have all these different categories of plastic that it's crazy.
And whatever happened to reduce and reuse? We learned the 3 R's, and they're supposed to be in order. You reduce consumption, then you reuse the bottles and whatever, and then you don't have to recycle because you're done. Right? That's 99% of it right there, but there's no money in reducing and reusing. No. There's money in recycling. So we have these enormous recycling programs that aren't doing anything really that's particularly worthwhile. It's like the 3rd digit that we're affecting.
Yeah, I mean, the money...
Follow the money.
The money is in selling more plastic bottles.
Right. Yes.
It's really where it comes down
to.
And then they don't have to collect them, and they put a little label on the bottom of the bottle that says, recycle responsibly or something.
Yeah.
And so they leave it to the consumer to do something with it, whereas the industry just throws their hands up in the air and goes, "Oh well, you bought the stuff. It's your problem."
And there's probably some money in creating those enormous recycling programs too.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. I mean, there's one in every major city now where the truck comes around and blah blah.
I saw a piece up in
Who's
Windsor.
contracting all that?
I think it was Windsor, Canada, where they were collecting the plastic and stuff and incinerating it and making electricity. But some smart aleck college kids came through and figured out that what it cost to separate and collect all this stuff and then pile it up into this incinerator, it was 3 times the amount of energy than if you just stuck it in a bag and it went to the landfill. It would have been,
Right.
energy efficient would have been better to just send it to the landfill.
Right.
And I mean, that's the pathetic part, is I think that we're we're lulled into this place, and I think so much of it is this corporate narrative that we live in.
Right.
And I mean, maybe you can speak a little bit about this, because I mean, you went through the academic system and became, at the age of 40, I think you said, which is a hell of a thing. I think you said a professor emeritus. So
No, I was a tenured full professor,
tenured full.
the highest rank, before I turned 40. That happens so rarely. There's no statistics kept on it.
How'd you do it?
I was driven, and I started young. I had my PhD at the age of 27, postdoc, first academic position, Texas A&M University when I was 28, tenure track position when I was 29, went up for tenure and promotion to associate professor 5 years later. So I just I just pushed and pushed and pushed, and I was a workaholic.
And when you say workaholic, though, I mean, were you just gifted? Maybe. I mean, that's what I think. I think you were gifted with a very expansive memory and mind to be able to comprehend what you had to do, because most people can't do this stuff.
Yes, absolutely. It was a combination of things. I was very driven, a work ethic instilled undoubtedly by my parents, and
Who were both teachers?
Yeah, and to a certain extent by this culture. And then my wife, for 32 years and 11 months, was very, very accommodating.
Yeah.
She was just enormously helpful. She did field work with me out in the field when I couldn't find anybody else to do the work. And so it really was a team effort all that time, with late nights and getting up early and spending time in the field instead of with her, or when I was with her, we're out collecting field data. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I was smarter than your average doorknob, no doubt about that. And I was
just a hat rack.
very, very driven, and I had the support of this one very important person in my life.
Yeah.
And the combination of those things led to success as we measure it in the society, moving up the ladder very quickly. So that was great, and it gave me enormous privilege, most of which was unearned.
Now, why would you say that?
I was living at the tail end of the age of economic expansion in a culture that really, really grants unearned privilege on people who look a lot like me. Heterosexual Caucasian men are handed the platter, and you really have to screw it up to not make a go of it, right? It's far more difficult for, say, a woman of color to go through the academic ranks with that kind of speed
or
that
a
I did.
person of accent and color.
Right. So I was, we don't get to choose when and to whom we're born.
Yeah.
But that makes a tremendous difference in how things turn out for us. So I didn't choose James Lyle and Edna Carroll McPherson as my parents, much less born in Wallace, Idaho, and growing up in small town Weippe, Idaho, and becoming attracted to education as a result, and having this work ethic that was instilled into me, the drive.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you could argue that it's all a series of accidents and sliding doors moments and just being lucky enough to recognize which door to walk through and that sort of thing. So, of course, a lot of it is just luck. It's just like, there's no other way to put it.
Yeah,
I
would have to say
had I been born black in the Congo Republic at the same time, I guarantee my life would have turned out very differently.
Here's an AK-47.
Bingo. Child soldier.
7-year-old person, go.
Child soldier or dead?
Yeah.
Maybe both.
Well, yeah, yeah.
So yes, I was driven. Yes, I had these things going for me. Yes, I was reasonably intelligent, and so on.
Well, I would say more than reasonably intelligent, Doctor. I would say that you probably have one of the higher IQs that, if we took the tests, you would rank up there with the, on that testing scale.
Right, and that has its downside, as it turns out.
In the upper echelon, put it that way.
Sure.
What's the downside?
The downside is I started to see through things that this culture doesn't really want us to see through.
In what way?
I became radicalized at a pretty young age, and radical here means to get to the root. So I was getting to the root of myriad issues, and it occurred to me that because of when and where I was born and what I looked like, I was being given privilege that I hadn't yet earned. I was recognizing that civilization itself, this set of living arrangements, is responsible for a lot of damage that most people in my position were unwilling to admit. I could see it. Once you see it, as Arundhati Roy wrote in Power Politics, once you see it.
Who's this?
Arundhati Roy, Indian writer and speaker.
Arundhati Roy.
Yeah, and she wrote a book published in 2001 called Power Politics, and I believe it was on page 7. She writes, once you've seen it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And once you see it, you become personally accountable.
I've heard that expression, yes.
So, and that's where I was. I recognized that it was civilization itself that was driving to extinction all those species. It was civilization itself that was fouling the air and dirtying the water and eroding the soils into the ocean. So that's all the untoward stuff that most people don't want to acknowledge, don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
So you're in the academy, you're at a major university, and it's a good life. You get paid really a comfortable amount of money to do the work you want to do, to teach the courses you want, to do research on whatever you want once you get tenure. You're doing the work you want to do. Mm-hmm. It's great. It is a screaming deal. And to see through that and say that it's still civilization.
Yeah.
You still have to look in the mirror at the end of the day and hold yourself accountable. And most people aren't doing that. They're looking the other way. And so,
or maybe they're not willing to really examine what you're talking about.
Could very well be.
Well, and
And so the point is that I was able to look beneath the surface and act on it. And either my colleagues were unwilling to look beneath the surface or they were unable to look beneath the surface. Regardless of how it starts, I saw it and I couldn't unsee it. And many of my colleagues apparently never saw it.
And went with the curriculum and the paycheck and said, this is fine, you're nuts.
Exactly.
You're out of your mind. What are you doing?
Bingo. Why would you leave this gig at the age of 49?
Mistakes were made.
Yes,
that's why. You told me that before. Mistakes were made. Now, I know you can't go back in time and all the rest of it, but think about it. That one day when you said, I'm out of here, I'm going to the mud hut. Mm-hmm. If you'd have taken that other course and said, you know what, fine. You're not giving me any teaching. You're not going to allow me. I'm still professor, and I still will get a paycheck, and I'm just going to stay here and call your bluff. Mm-hmm. I mean, did you ever think of that? If you just, to this day, if you'd have just stayed there?
Well, I think every day of how my life might be different today had I stayed there. Of course I do, because it was one of those monumental sliding doors moments. That was a film starring Gwyneth Paltrow way back in the day.
Yeah, sliding door moments.
Right, right. So she goes out of her apartment, rushes to the subway, just misses the subway. The sliding doors close. She goes back home. And then on a parallel track, the movie runs, and she made it barely into the door.
Yeah.
And so her life turns out completely differently.
Right. This parallel universe.
Right. And so, would it have been different? I replay that all the time. And I've no doubt that it would have been enormously different had I stayed there. I was radicalized. I was still taking a radical approach to my teaching, and I would have continued to do that.
You were teaching in the local prison system, I think, poetry. And because they weren't allowing, the university was not allowing you to teach anymore.
Just my home department. My home department wouldn't allow me to teach. The honors college thought I still had something to say. So I was teaching through the honors college a course called Poetry Inside Out. Inside was, at the time I last taught it, inside was the men's pods of the Pima County Jail, the girls' pods of the Pima County Juvenile Detention Facility.
That's Pima, Arizona, right?
Yes, Pima County, Arizona.
County, yes.
That's right. That was the two groups that were in, and the out groups, the unincarcerated groups, were countercultural vocational high school, where the entry ticket was you had to get kicked out of at least 3 mainstream high schools before you were loser enough to get into. So that was mostly Hispanic kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other out group was my honors course at the University of Arizona. And we all interacted with each other. We shared poetry. All of my students had to go into the juvie hall at least once and spend a couple of hours there with people who were almost their same age, but very, very different in terms of their personal background.
That sliding door had shut on some people, where it was open for others.
Bingo. So here's the honor students are all upper middle class, almost all Caucasian kids, and the kids in juvie hall are almost uniformly Hispanic. They're just a few years younger. In some cases, just 1 or 2 years younger. But their lives they were just on the wrong side of the tracks. You know, they'd had different life experiences
or something, and
they had, you know, they're living at home with their mom, and they've been abused in every conceivable way. Most recently, sexually abused by their mother's current boyfriend. They've been shot at.
Oh, that
and
was
missed.
the gals, right? The young women.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And so they've been knifed. They had a friend die in their arms. They've been chased by the cops since they were young. They're trying to raise their 6-year-old brother. They got everything stacked against them.
Yeah.
As opposed to the relatively privileged kids who were in the honors program. And they'd interact for a while, and both individuals from both groups, the most common refrain was, they're just like me. I could be going to college instead of being here in juvie hall. And the kids who came out, and I call them kids even though they're adults, the college students who came out of juvie hall, we'd ask them what that was like for them, and they'd think for a minute and they'd say, those girls are just like me.
Yeah.
You know, so they were empathizing. We were actually creating empathy and pointing out that
maybe
there are these sliding
system.
doors.
You know, that stirred some.
Of course.
You know, it stirred the pot a little bit there.
Yeah.
To do that type of thing.
Of course. Yes. So it attracts attention, positive and negative. Anyway.
I'd say mostly positive.
I think so too. It was written up in various newspapers and that sort of thing. And so it brought positive attention to the university because of my work there. But, you know, it just wasn't the same as teaching significant numbers of students for an entire semester or establishing relationships with them that lasted for many years.
Right.
This Poetry Inside Out, even though there were the honor students who I'd see for a year or two, wasn't the same as majors in natural resource management who were there for 4 years, and I saw them for the whole time.
And
I'd
did
see them in the
field
hallway.
work with you and
did
all the
field
rest of
work,
it, yeah.
all kinds of experiences that tend to create collegiality, camaraderie in a group. So it just wasn't the same, and again there was that case of trying to look myself in the mirror at the end of the day. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it.